All right, cool. So hey everyone, my name is Clarence. I'm an engineer at Yahoo, and I work on YUI and Mojito. So today I'm just going to talk about how you would render single-page applications for any framework you choose. So just as a quick survey, just outside of Node, for the client side, what sort of single-page application frameworks do you guys use? Anyone use Backbone? What about Angular? Ember? Or React? So basically the idea behind it is right now everything that you have with those frameworks, it's usually rendered on the client side. Your templates are on the client, your routing is on the client, but as we'll talk about that might not always be what you want to do. So with single page applications, there's a lot of things that you can do with them. Some of the main reasons that you would use them is that you get these crazy slick transitions. And you don't have that page refresh that might make your app a bit less feeling like a native app. And also everything is like JSON. So you get your data from a JSON API, you read from that, and that's great. So it's nice that you have this slicker, better user interface. But there's a big problem with applications like those. You're breaking the web. And with single page applications, a lot of times you end up having situations like this with Twitter, where you have a completely blank page. This with Bustle, which is using Ember, and they're a completely blank page if you don't have JavaScript turned on. And even McDonald's. Even McDonald's will give you just this blank HTML container, and none of the data that you actually want to see is actually on the page. And so you might say, fine, I don't care about people that have JavaScript turned off. They aren't my users. And that's not something that should matter to me. But the thing is that even if you don't care about progressive enhancement, or dealing with people that don't have JavaScript turned on, or even people that use screen readers that rely on just having the HTML on the page, there's one thing that's important to everyone that you need to take into consideration. And that's performance. When you have a single page application where you send over HTML container, so basically a simple HTML shell that has nothing in it. And what you have in there is just a direction to fetch JSON data from your API and have that fill up that container. That takes time. And even if you already have that JSON data on the page, that's computational time that you'll need to have from rendering your templates. And for us at Yahoo, where a lot of the work that we're focusing on right now is on mobile web, having that time it takes to render out a template is a lot for a small, less computationally intensive device, like a phone or a tablet. So the solution that people have been coming up with is the idea of isomorphic JavaScript frameworks. And with isomorphic JavaScript frameworks, there's basically two things you have. So you have your API server, that just responds with JSON data. So all of your actual business data is stored and returned from that API server. And the idea that we're having now is the idea of an app server. And with that app server gets that data, gets JSON data from the API server and renders that on the server. So basically it's two different servers right there. There's your API and there's your application. You fetch that data, you render it into HTML on that application server, and then from there, on that first load, when a user goes from a browser and visits your application for the first time, no matter what URL they hit, they'll get HTML. So they'll get straight HTML from the very beginning. And since they get straight HTML, you don't have the issue where you have that empty shell anymore. Or even if you have that empty shell, you don't get that empty shell and then a giant flash of content. You get HTML, so your users get to your content faster. And from the work that we've done, we've noticed that we've saved time up to hundreds of milliseconds from when the user first makes that HTTP request to being able to see that content initially. And the thing is that you still get the benefits of every other single page application. So from then on, once you have that HTML on the screen, all of your app navigation is done just like a regular single page app. So from there, your browser can communicate directly with your API server, and all you get back is JSON. And then with that, you get that smooth user interface And from there, you get like those transitions between screens. And basically with that, you basically have all of the benefits of both a single page app and a server render app. So you get the benefits of early initial performance, like on that first load, and that smooth user interface after that. So from right now, there's two main isomorphic JavaScript frameworks that work exactly like I mentioned over there. And those are Mojito by us at Yahoo and Render by the folks at Airbnb. And so these are great, and these serve the purposes that we've been using it for. So with Mojito, we've been using it with Yahoo Search and a bunch of our other properties like Cricket and many others. Render is being used by Airbnb in their mobile app. And so for their mobile app loads a lot faster than a regular standalone backbone app. But the main issue with these two is that it really limits you with the client-side framework that you choose to use. So with Mojito, we haven't had much popularity with it from the start because Mojito is very reliant on YUI. And if you use Mojito, that basically forces you into the entire YUI ecosystem. And even though YUI is great for us, it might not be the thing that everyone else wants to use. And same thing with Render. Even though Render uses Backbone, you might not always want to use Backbone. It seems like a lot of people want to use like Ember or Angular or React. And if you use Render, then you can't choose which sort of client-side framework that you want to use. So in order to solve this problem, we decided to break down what sorts of problems we need to solve when building an isomorphic framework like that. And the three parts that we came up with are, you want to share your templates between client and server. In order to have an isomorphic framework, you need to be able to render a template on the server, and you also need to be able to render it on the client. There's also data rehydration. This is a bit more complicated, but the idea is that since you're sending out HTML on the first load, you also need to get back, you also need a way for your client-side JavaScript models to get data. So they can get the JSON data, and they can react back to any like user inputs that a user tries to enter. So for example, if you have backbone models and all you're sending over is HTML, you also need a way to send JSON data over so that you can turn your backbone models into models that actually contain data. And finally, route sharing. This is a bit more complicated, but the idea behind route sharing is that you want to use the exact same URLs on both the server, say for example in your Express app, and also on the client, say with your backbone router. And in that case, we wanted to make it easy so that your Express routes are being used in the same way as your backbone routes. So you don't need to write routes one time for Express and routes again for backbone. And so these are the ways that we've decided to solve the problem. We created a few micro-libraries as part of the Modown project that we've been working on recently. And so with our micro-libraries, to solve the template sharing problem, all you need to do is just use a template engine that works on both Node and on the browser. And in that case, we're using either handlebars, Dust, anything that can render out into a string. And to solve the problem with data rehydration, we have this new Express module called express-state. And what express-state allows you to do is that it lets you resynchronize the data between your server and your browser. And you expose only the data that you want people to see. And so for instance, if you don't want to send, if you're doing bucket testing, for instance, or A/B testing, and you want users in one bucket to see certain paths and users in another bucket to not see other paths, express-state will let you do that. It'll let you like hide the data that you want to be hidden, and the data that you want to be shown will be sent down to the client. And express-map lets you turn your express routes into a serialized object. And with that serialized object, whether you use Backbone's router or Ember's router or any other router, you can regenerate an actual client-side router from that serialized route object. So just as a really quick demo, so usually we use YUI, but in this case I decided to use like React as an example of how we can integrate the same library into, integrate these Modown libraries into a React application. So for example, this is the React to-do MVC. So just really fast. Okay. So the idea is that if you load in React, usually for like the to-do MVC, all you get is you start off with is that single HTML shell. But what I've done here is that I've set it up so that it renders the full HTML on the server at the very beginning. If you take a look at the source, all of this is generated by the server, and this is the actual React application code that's right there. And so you can see like all of the data is already there, and from the start, all of the HTML is there. So you don't need to wait for that data to load. And the other thing that I did inside this application is that I used express state. And what express state allows you to do is that it takes that data, so this might simulate like a database, for instance. And that data can get exposed on the client under a certain namespace. And in the namespace I chose like the to MVC namespace. So what you can see is that inside this source, let's see. So right here, this is where the express state code gets sent out. And you can see that this is the JSON data that you can use to rehydrate your application. And to rehydrate your application, it's as simple as going back in, taking that data, and putting it into your model. So that's a simple way of just like rehydrating your model so that they have exactly the same data that you want to see. And so, yeah, sorry.
And on the DOM, it's exactly the same?
Yes.
Or do you need to swap the two DOMs?
So the idea with that is that React actually handles that for us. So because of the server rendering, what React does is that it calculates a sort of like hash from the DOM. So React has the idea of this virtual DOM. And so with React, I generate just the raw HTML on the server. So I use React.render component to string, and that gives me the HTML as a markup string. And at the same time, once I call init here, what React does is that it calculates what HTML gets generated. And since it notices that the HTML that's already there from the server and the HTML that's calculated over here is the same, all it does is it wires up the event handlers. And so it doesn't need to do another like re-render of the DOM. It doesn't delete anything from the DOM and take it back out. All it does is it wires up like the event handlers that I need to like basically be able to like type things in. And so that's the benefit of React. That's done on the React side, and what we're doing is basically handling the synchronization between server and client. And so yeah, that's the idea that we want to have. We want you to be able to build these isomorphic applications regardless of the template engine or regardless of the client-side framework. And so yeah, thanks. So that's it. And the idea behind it is that we have a lot more packages and a lot more work that we're doing under the mowdown keyword on NPM. And so we're doing things with internationalization, so you can share the same localization code between client and server, and a lot more. So definitely check out like the stuff on NPM there. And if you have any questions, feel free to get in touch with me. So thanks.
Questions?
Or any questions? You guys are already using this, right?
Yeah, if you take a look at Yahoo Screen, for instance, or even the new digital magazines, you can see like the express state code that has all the JSON data at the very bottom of the page. So yeah, this is introduction.
So for some of the client-side frameworks that actually require a browser to render the HTML, how do you go about that?
So basically right now, this works well with React and it works well with Backbone. The problem with Angular and Ember is that it does require a DOM on the server side to render, and that's something that from our tests, having JS DOM, for instance, in Node, is something that's really like not performance enough. So having spoken with some of the folks on the Ember team, once HTML bars in Ember is out, then you'll be able to have just like a small subset of the DOM instead of the full DOM on the server, and that'll let you actually render out HTML string in Node like really quickly, and so you'll be able to use these once HTML bars is out.
So some of these frameworks are pushing to make their frameworks more server-side compatible now?
Exactly, yeah. Ember is definitely doing that. I think Angular will definitely have a harder time with that. They've been working on that, but it's really hard for them since their rendering engine is very tied to the DOM.
Other questions? All right, thank you.
Cool.